The Glass Armor, a journey through the walls of the heart. Welcome to Divine Therapy Incorporated. Before we begin today's story, I want you to take a deep, slow breath. Find a comfortable position. Allow your shoulders to drop away from your ears. As you listen to the journey of Ilara, allow yourself to think about your own journey, your own strengths, and the silent ways you have protected yourself over the years. This is a story of survival, but more importantly, it is a story of coming home to oneself. In a quiet valley, nestled between mountains that touched the clouds and a sea that whispered to the shore, there lived a young woman named Ilara. To look at Ilara was to see a person who functioned perfectly. She kept her house clean, she did her work with precision, and she moved through the town with a quiet, polite grace. But Ilara had a secret. Beneath her ordinary clothes, she was encased in a suit of armor made entirely of glass. To understand the armor, we have to travel back across the bridge of time, to when Ilara was only 7 years old. At 7, the world is supposed to be made of soft things, velvet blankets, the warm fur of a puppy, the gentle hands of a parent. But for Ilara, the world turned sharp very suddenly. It wasn't a physical storm, but an emotional one. A series of events, a loss of a loved one, a sudden move to a cold, unfriendly place, and the realization that the people she looked to for safety were struggling with their own ghosts, left her feeling exposed. She felt as though she was standing in a freezing wind with no coat. Every harsh word from a teacher felt like a physical sting. Every time a friend left her out of a game, it felt like a small cut on her soul. Her nervous system was in a state of constant, high alert. She felt raw, as if her skin had been removed and every nerve ending was vibrating with the frequency of fear. One night, lying in her bed, Ilara made a wish. She didn't wish for the world to change. She knew, even then, that she couldn't control the wind or the rain. Instead, she whispered into her pillow, "I wish I were made of something that couldn't be hurt. I wish I were a statue." That was the night the first shard appeared. It was a small, transparent square of glass, no bigger than a postage stamp, and it sat directly over the center of her chest. It felt cool. It felt solid. And for the first time in months, that specific spot on her body didn't feel like it was trembling. She felt a strange, quiet relief. As she grew, the armor grew with her. By the time she was 12, the glass covered her torso. By 16, it had grown down her arms and legs. By 21, she was entirely encased. It was a marvel of subconscious engineering. The glass was thick, reinforced by her own determination to never feel that raw feeling again. It was beautiful, too. It caught the light of the setting sun and turned it into gold. It reflected the moon and made her look like a silver ghost walking through the woods. The armor gave her many gifts. It gave her the gift of composure. While other people were crying at funerals or shaking with anger during arguments, Ilara remained still. The glass absorbed the vibrations of other people's pain and rage. It didn't reach her. She became the person everyone leaned on because she seemed unshakable. She took pride in her glass. She polished it with her silence and strengthened it with her isolation. But as the years turned into a decade, the gifts of the armor began to reveal their hidden costs. The first cost was the loss of texture. Ilara lived in a world of through. She saw the world through a lens. She heard the world through a barrier. She even tasted the world through a filter. One spring morning, she walked into a garden filled with blooming jasmine. She watched the bees hovering over the white petals. She saw the way the dew clung to the leaves like tiny diamonds. But as she leaned in, she smelled nothing. The glass helmet she wore kept the air inside her suit stale and recycled. She reached out to touch a petal, wanting to feel its silken softness, but her glass finger met only the hard, unyielding surface of the glass. There was no sensation, no connection. She realized then that she was a ghost in a living world. She was present, but she was not participating. The second cost was the weight. Glass is heavy. To lift her arm to wave hello felt like lifting a lead weight. To walk to the store required a level of physical exertion that left her drained by noon. Her muscles were constantly tight, pushing against the rigid boundaries of her protection. She was in a state of chronic exhaustion, but because the armor also numbed her physical pain, she didn't realize how tired she truly was until she would collapse into bed at night, her body aching in the dark. The third, and most painful cost, was the loss of connection. Elara wanted to be loved. She truly did. She would go on dates, and she would sit across from kind men who wanted to know her. But when they looked at her, they didn't see Elara. They saw their own reflections in her glass. She was a mirror, not a person. When a friend would try to offer a hand in support, the hand would clink against her armor and slide off. There was no skin-to-skin soul contact. Elara was the safest woman in the world, and she was the loneliest. One day, Elara went to the great library. She was looking for a way to make the glass thinner, perhaps a way to keep the protection but regain the feeling. She found an old book, bound in worn leather, with no title on the spine. Inside, there were no instructions for making glass, but there was a drawing of a tree. The caption read, "The oak tree does not survive the winter by becoming stone. It survives by letting its leaves fall. It survives by being flexible. To be rigid is to be brittle. To be soft is to be eternal." Elara stared at the word brittle. She realized that if a giant stone were to hit her glass armor, it wouldn't just dent, it would shatter. And if it shattered, she would be left with nothing but 1,000 tiny knives piercing her skin. Her protection was actually a liability. That evening, as she walked home, she saw an old woman sitting on a bench. The woman was crying. Not a polite, quiet cry, but a deep, heaving sob of grief. Beside her sat a young child, who was simply holding the woman's hand. The child wasn't doing anything to stop the crying. He was just there. He was vulnerable to her sadness. He was letting the sadness wash over him too. Elara stood a few feet away, her glass suit humming in the twilight. She felt a sudden, violent surge of envy for the child. He was raw, just like she had been at 7 years old. But he wasn't running. He wasn't building a wall. He was staying in the wind. A small voice inside Elara's head, a voice that had been muffled for 15 years, whispered, "I want to feel the wind again." As soon as she spoke those words to herself, a sound echoed through the quiet street. Ping! It was the sound of a crack. A tiny, silver line appeared on the glass near her collarbone. Elara gasped. She felt a sudden rush of cold air hit a tiny patch of her skin. It was terrifying. It felt like a needle. She instinctively tried to cover the crack with her hand, to seal it back up. But as she touched the crack, she felt the texture of the glass, the real, sharp, cold texture of it, and then she felt her own skin. She began to tremble. This was the moment of choice. Every person who has been through trauma reaches this crossroads. Do you repair the wall, or do you let it crumble? Elara decided to do something she hadn't done in a long time. She decided to be curious. Instead of fixing the crack, she closed her eyes and focused all of her attention on that 1 square inch of exposed skin. She felt the air. She felt the moisture in the atmosphere. She felt the subtle vibration of a passing car. It was overwhelming. It was too much. But it was also life. Over the next few months, Elara began a process of intentional dismantling. She didn't use a hammer, she used the truth. She went to a therapist who specialized in the architecture of the soul. In their first session, Elara didn't talk about her glass. She just sat there. The therapist said, "You don't have to perform for me. You don't have to be strong here. You can just be." Elara felt a plate of glass on her back loosen. Ping. In the second session, she talked about the day she was 7. She talked about the cold wind and the fear of being broken. She cried for the first time in a decade. As the tears ran down her face, they didn't hit the glass, they ran underneath it. The salt in the tears began to dissolve the adhesive of her fear. Ping. 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 The armor began to fall away in pieces. It was a messy process. Sometimes she would be at the grocery store and a piece of her leg armor would drop to the floor and vanish. She would feel suddenly exposed, as if she were walking naked through the aisles. She would want to run home and hide. But she stayed. She practiced the brave breath. She learned that her rawness wasn't a defect, it was her compass. When she felt the sting of someone's unkindness, she didn't build glass, she used her voice. She said, "That hurt me." When she felt the warmth of a friend's smile, she didn't just observe it, she leaned into it. The more she leaned into the world, the more the glass transformed. It didn't just break, it changed its state. The heavy, rigid panes began to melt, turning into a sort of liquid light that she could pull into herself. She realized that the energy she had used to build the armor was actually her own strength. She was reclaiming her power. One morning, Elara woke up and realized the helmet was gone. She walked to her window and opened it. For the first time in her adult life, she smelled the rain on the pavement. She smelled the neighbor's jasmine. She felt the sun hit her face, not through a filter, but directly. It was so bright it made her eyes water, but she didn't turn away. She went to the park, the same park where she had seen the crying woman. She sat on the same bench. A small dog ran up to her, its tail wagging, its tongue hanging out. The dog jumped up and licked her hand. Elara didn't flinch. She felt the wetness. She felt the warmth. She felt the scratch of the dog's fur. She laughed. It was a loud, uninhibited sound that came from the very bottom of her lungs. It was the sound of a person who was finally, truly, unencased. She looked around at the other people in the park. Now that she wasn't wearing her own glass, she could see the armor on everyone else. She saw a businessman wearing a suit of iron. She saw a young girl wearing a cloak of shadows. She saw a couple wrapped in a fog of silence. She didn't judge them. She knew why they were wearing those things. She knew they were just trying to survive the wind. She walked over to the businessman, who looked stressed and angry, and she simply said, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" The man started to snap a sharp reply, but then he looked into Elara's eyes. He didn't see a reflection of his own anger. He saw a clear, open window. He paused. His iron suit seemed to settle, just an inch. "Yes," he said, his voice softening. "It actually is." Elara realized that her vulnerability wasn't just a gift for herself, it was a gift for the world. By being open, she gave others permission to take off a single glove, or unbolt a single plate of their own armor. As we conclude this story, I want you to imagine yourself in that park. Think about the armor you have been wearing. Maybe it's a suit of "I'm fine." Maybe it's a shield of "I don't need anyone." Maybe it's a helmet of "I have to be perfect." Take a moment to thank that armor. It kept you safe when the world was too sharp. It did its job. It got you to this moment. But now, look at the cracks. Don't be afraid of them. The cracks are not where you are broken, the cracks are where you are beginning to breathe. At Divine Therapy Incorporated, We believe that your journey is sacred. We believe that you have the strength to dismantle the glass, piece by piece, at your own pace. You don't have to do it all today. You just have to be willing to feel the wind. You are not alone. You are resilient. You are human. And you are ready to live. Take one final deep breath. Hold it for a moment, feeling the air inside you. And as you exhale, imagine one small piece of glass falling away, leaving you just a little bit lighter, just a little bit more alive. Thank you for being here with us today. Your healing is the most beautiful story ever told.